Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Elen, Willia, can you hear me? Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Gillen, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I hear you.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. This was just a test as we had some problems this morning. Welcome. And can you see my PPTs?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hello Anouk. Bonjour Anouk. Tu vas bien? Wendelin, Elen, Robin, are you here? Hello, Robin. Welcome.
Sorry, I was a bit late. No, I'm not late. I'm on time.
Yes, you're on time. And we are waiting for Elen. I think that Wendelin should arrive late. So we'll start without Wendelin for question 1, maybe question 2.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, as you may know, the atmosphere in Paris is a little bit special at the moment. And yeah, it is creating also some troubles. Yeah. So let's wait maybe 5 minutes, not more.
Sure.
Not to be too late, because then we have session 3 and 4.
Is that Ghazi? Hey, Ghazi.
Elen, are you here? Not yet.
We can.
Okay, so again, welcome everybody. I want to say again that this session is recorded and that it has started. So again, if you don't want to appear in the video, which will be put online on our YouTube channel, please switch off your camera. So I'm very happy to introduce this panel 2 about phenomenologies, post-phenomenologies, and organization studies. In the background of these sessions, there are many questions that came last year and the year before about what phenomenologies are, their relationship with process studies, post-Marxism, activity theories, more specifically the relationship between event and experience. So maybe on the way to our discussion and on the way to this panel, we will have an opportunity to make some clarification or maybe to explain the diversity of phenomenological approaches and their intersection. Maybe on the way to this panel, we will have an opportunity to make some link with management and organization studies. So I'm extremely happy today to introduce our speakers. So Elen Riot, you know Elen, you met her already this morning. So with a senior lecturer at Université de Reims and with a strong interest in philosophy, aesthetics, art-based research, social movements. Many of you know Robin Holt from CBS, also very interested in philosophical approaches of organizing and management, and extremely knowledgeable about phenomenology and process studies. Let's be more precise, Heidegger and process philosophers. Wendelin Küpers from Elen will join us on the way, probably on question 2. And you met Wendelin this morning. As you saw, Wendelin is an expert about phenomenology, and in particular, an expert about Merleau-Ponty. And myself, so I am at Université Paris-Dauphine. I don't know what could be my expertise. Let's say that I try to learn more and more about phenomenology. So our idea was to make it short and to come as quickly as possible to an interaction. And our idea was to discuss around 3 very simple questions. Correct this. So the first question, which is both a very simple and an extremely complex one that I would like to ask to our speakers and maybe at some point to myself, it's what is for you phenomenology or phenomenologies? And maybe let's start with you, Robin. What is your view of phenomenology and what it is?
So I get to go first. Okay. So I think I would want to come at this from my, I guess from a feeling of anxiety that I had as I was learning to behave in the context of business and management studies, and more broadly, I guess, organization studies. And this is a field to which I have become dedicated. It's the field to which I feel committed. And because of that, I feel, and feel is, I'm using the word feel deliberately here. I also feel implicated in certain tendencies in these fields to push me where I don't want to be. And I find in phenomenology a kind of a refuge. So I think there are various ways of expanding on this, but I'll just confine myself to something that's broadly Wittgensteinian in its impulse, to try and describe this feeling of anxiety or fear. So I think we are plagued by the requirement to configure knowledge in certain ways, and by this I mean it's style. Yeah, it's not necessarily about content here. So there's a sense in which to be knowledgeable, to make knowledge claims, which is after all our business as scholars, we have to articulate what is in the world or the constitution of the world in as clear and as explicit and as full a way as possible. So there's a sense in which knowledge is something that's Procrustean, that's well defined, that's got clarity. Yeah. And if it's not made explicit, if it's not got edges, if it's not got detailed contents, then it's less knowledgeable. That's a presumption, yeah, that I find problematic. I think there's also a presumption, a tendency in the way that we understand knowledge for it to colonize the way we relate to things, that it's somehow the best way of relating to things, that it's what we aspire to, so that we should, by matter of choice, keep for company units and variables and hypotheses and propositions and justified true beliefs, and that these are the best possible company, and in a sense I feel slightly antagonistic towards that assumption. So why is the knowledgeable relationship to the world the preeminent one? You know, why can't we think of love as equally important way of relating to things? And then lastly, I kind of object to the way in which knowledge claims kind of entail one another, so that they project into a future which somehow means we kind of put blinkers on. So, you know, if we have a certain theory of human nature, you know, such as is populated by agency theory, for example, to use something from our field. So we're all rational evaluative maximizers. Then that theory of that claim then entails, it kind of imposes itself on subsequent understanding. So we then understand an organization such as the firm as that organizational condition which allows us to best manage a collection of rational evaluative maximizers. And we understand a market, yeah, as that collection of organizations, yeah, which best enable us to manage a rational collection of rational. So in a sense, it kind of keeps pushing, yeah. And we, yeah. So I think on all three counts, yeah, I think if this is my feeling about the way that the fields are configured, I find phenomenology is a way of pushing back at all of these. I'm now rambling, but I could keep going, but I think I've probably taken too much time.
We'll come back to your very stimulating perspective, Robin, but maybe before that, Elen, what is your own view, your own intuition about what phenomenology is or can be or could be?
Thank you. I'd contrast with Robin. I tell you something quite personal about phenomenology. It's a very old memory. I remember my mother, she wouldn't often talk about philosophy. She didn't like philosophy. Like any true poet, she's not. But once she mentioned that Maurice Merleau-Ponty had this, I was 14 maybe, but it like sort of changed my life. So that's why I'm saying that is why I like phenomenology so much, because it, like, for me, I had no notion of philosophy, but suddenly it made me understand what time was, because she said, you know, this Merleau-Ponty has this notion that when he was a young boy, I think he engraved his name MMP on a wood table that at school, and that it remains MMP forever on this wood table when he was growing up to be a man and being a completely different person. And that this material thing was sort of a trace that showed that he was still who he was, but still he wasn't that at all anymore, the person that made this mark on the table. And for some reason, maybe you think I'm crazy, but to me, that was like illuminating. It's like it allowed me to grow in a sense. And I think many people say that phenomenology, oh yeah, it's very nice, but it's hard how it's written. And I'm afraid sometimes I agree. I think the wording, like in organization studies too, is somehow heavy. But I always remember the images and the words. They are so inventive. And they are really true to very personal phenomena. It helps you remember how things work. And that's what phenomenology is for me. Yeah. So thank you. Maybe you have questions, but later.
So let me stay in a personal tone, and let's say an emotional tone about the answer to this, because I feel also close to Elen's answer about what is for you phenomenology. And for me, it's a missed rendezvous. When I was 18, doing a French baccalaureate of philosophy, the A-level of philosophy, and I had a professor of philosophy whose name was Bruno Roche. And he was an expert about Kierkegaard and Merleau-Ponty, and he invited us at a conference at the Faculté Catholique de Lyon, which was about time. And I found it so boring. And I was with some friends, and I talked about this guy and this. And the good phase was the one at the bistro after that, because at that point it was much clearer. And we just remember that he said something about the difference between Bergson and Merleau-Ponty. And he had this very mysterious sentence saying that we could have learned mindfulness to Nazi, hours long, weeks long, months long, years long. This wouldn't have changed anything. And for him, this was precisely the point with Merleau-Ponty and something he wanted to say. And this sentence remained mysterious during 20 years. And much later, for some reasons related to research and some reading, I re-encountered Merleau-Ponty. And I realized what I was missing in the other things I was reading, this not abstract existentialism, this enflenched, embodied existentialism, which is also the locus of a possible control of our society, not to lose reasons, not to go really adrift, not to go to auto-destruction. And at some point, maybe at some age or some period of my life, this becomes obvious that for me, phenomenology, this was much more than a philosophy, but part of a relationship with life. And through this, I have not given any answer. I've just shared an emotion. But for me, this is really something important, which makes that I really want to stick to it and to use it as a soil, a ground, also to explore other things and intersections with other things. So maybe what I propose is to also see the other questions and to move to interactions and open discussions after that, because I think it can also feed the reflection about phenomenology. So the other question I wanted to ask both of you is, what is the potential of phenomenologies and maybe post-phenomenologies for organization studies? What can bring phenomenology to organization studies? So I'm sure, Robin, on this, you have a lot of answers.
I mean, following on from what's been said, I think it's, to me, it's the capacity to and the willingness to feel your kind of knowledge claims or to belong to them in some way. I think so much of what we do in organization studies and more broadly, at least, in business and management, is in a sense, it's a process of pushing knowledge outside of the subject. So that the subject is the knower, if you will, is somehow responsible for exteriorizing what is known, and thereby it becomes a general thing. And this is manifest in different ways. It's manifest in the urge to commit to covering laws or generalities that are predictive, that are valid, that are replicable. And in this, there's this kind of colonizing impulse of the future. Yeah, that this is no different from how an augur behaved in kind of Roman period. The idea that the future is thus, so that you are no longer, in a sense, implicated in this as a subject. I mean, by virtue of these laws. I think there's another way in which the subject is, in a sense, pushing, in a sense, excused from knowledge almost, is in this kind of figuring of instrumental relationships to things, so that we're constantly looking for how a means and an end, and a means and an end, and a means and an end. So in other words, there's this sense of constant restlessness that we relate to one another as though we are simply just means to further ends. So again, it's this kind of spilling out away from ourselves. And then I think lastly, in the idea of morals, you'll notice this is also following Kant a bit, that there's an urge to say what's right and wrong. And I think in all three counts, we are, in a sense, rather than understanding more about our condition of organization, we are understanding less. Yeah. So to the extent that we refuse to own our knowledge claims and belong to them and feel them, yeah, we are, in a sense, blinkering ourselves from experience. And phenomenology, to me, is the willingness to sort of bring knowledge back in to our own kind of world, our own purview, our own experience, and to cope with the fact, that thereby it's open, it's messy, it's contingent, it's a beautiful sort of myriad of antinomies. Yeah? There's nothing at fault with this. And thereby we understand organization very much in this kind of processual or this experience of unfolding or becoming, whatever the language one might use. Bergson's shift from toward the intensive away from the extensive. There's Elan Vital. All of this starts to open up and become legitimate. So in a sense, we're kind of expanding the criteria of meaning back into our own personal, kind of intimate world, and away from this kind of objectifying world. Yeah. So that's why I find, and there's huge possibilities here. We just have to sort of be brave enough to relinquish this urge to sort of order outside of ourselves. Did that make any sense? I'm not sure.
Oh, yes, it does. And for you, Elen, so what is brought by phenomenology talks to this?
No, it makes sense. It makes me think of your book, Robin, Strategy and Design, and that's what I had in mind when I thought about that second question. I think for two reasons, phenomenologies and post-phenomenologies have a lot of potential. And I would say it's paradoxical because they are both good for action and not action or goal-oriented. And they are good for this, I think, for this reason. Because I'm always interested by philosophies for action. Although I love aesthetics, maybe less ethics, but aesthetics, maybe it's meditative. But I think, like Robin, I have a great interest for strategy. I really love strategy, actually, but I don't know, I like it, I love it in real life. Maybe not necessarily in the way scholars talk about it. And I think phenomenology is especially strong for that because it's very good for action. Because it can make appear new things in a different way. They really, like Merleau-Ponty, for instance, he's my favorite, but I also like Husserl when he talked about the crisis of European sciences. And it's very strong because what they say is like, there is this routine of knowledge, as you said, Robin, and it's no longer, it's gone, it's no longer sticking to this word. We can't use it. We try to, but it's like we have to act, and we can't be carrying this baggage or in our hands, because we have to be able to do things. So it manages to make you forget about plans, for instance, planning and so on, because it insists so much on process. And also maybe it insists more on voice than on universal discourses. And for strategy, for action, I think it's important. But on the other hand, for me, it's good for action, and we need action. And on the other hand, I would say it's strategy as design, as Robin's books has shown. It's not, phenomenology is good because it's not goal-oriented, it's not functional. It's often, it looks like it's a bit dreamy because it's not addressing things in a very direct, straightforward way, like most academics like to do, in our discipline at least. So it seems like it's complex, it's form of errand, but it's not actually. And I think when you have to think in terms of, for instance, the environment, when I manage this program about bioeconomics, it's very, very helpful, because simply there is not having directly a goal makes appear things that matter that you didn't see in the first place when you were setting up all your program, and you made mistakes. So it's really a good way. But the third point is, though, I have this little doubt, or I don't know, about these parishes of phenomenology. And I thank you, François, for having me read Dan Dahavi's paper on speculative realism attacking phenomenology. And it's true, I think for a reason, you have to be inspired by one type of author. So phenomenology, for instance, I would say I'm for Husserl and Merleau-Ponty. So I'm maybe a conservative in terms of rationality, but I'm not, I'm not like the Paris that would, for instance, use object-oriented phenomenology, or combine it with Deleuze or Latour. And so I think there are parishes that are Heidegger. I really not into a Heidegger at all. Very personal problem with that author. So, but personal, but also I think there are different phenomenologies, and probably post-phenomenologies, although I'm more of a classic, and but I wouldn't put them in the same bag. Yes, I like the ones who think, try to keep reasoning in the middle of things. Maybe because of Descartes and Pascal. I like them a lot. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Elen. Let's try a very short answer to this very important question, because I know that many people in the loop of this Zoom session, they belong to Org Studies, and we meet in the context of egos. Actually, I'm not sure to have any reasonable and convinced answer to this question. And that's also why I found this panel interesting. I would be tempted to say that phenomenology is a way to accept the messiness of our world, and to to recognize that organization studies needs always to be more than organization studies, not only in the sense that we need to go beyond organizations as entity, which is probably part of a plausible message, but in the sense that there will be always more depth and a lack of focus in a way in anything we could say about organizing processes. That experience we try to understand from managers or organizations, strategies, any context of experience is always far beyond what we could describe. And maybe at some point this makes that artists can be interesting to touch this pre-reflexive layer, chiasmatic to language itself. But yeah, so maybe a modesty. And I wonder maybe a critical stance, not in the sense of CMS, but in a more explicit maybe stance. Yeah, I am convinced that the biggest trick of capitalism is to exploit what I see as a major phenomenological construct. It's ordinary life. If ordinary life did not exist, I mean, there would be no faults for capitalism. If we had the possibility to be always in a sense of novelty, if novelty would never vanish, then capitalism would have nothing to capture and no fault to commodify. And I think it's highly phenomenological, these statements. And saying this, I think it's critical. It's ontological, it's critical. So I'm just thinking loudly, but I believe that the potential of phenomenologies and post-phenomenologies for org studies is huge, that brilliant things have been already written. But maybe that we need some forum also to share these ideas that may exist with other philosophical discussions, maybe partly, but not explicitly. Then, before moving to a more collective and interactive discussion, there will be this question 3, more about your own personal individual research and individual use of phenomenology. So how do you use phenomenological concepts in your own research? Can you share examples about that, Robin? You mentioned some research about strategy, strategic processes, or maybe other things. Yes, your mic is mute, Robin. We cannot hear you. Sorry.
Sorry, I had it on and turned it off. I think why another reason why it seems quite germane to organization studies, phenomenology, is it seems to in some ways place, I mean, organization at the center of things, insofar as if we are to apprehend a kind of, or to understand or to encounter life or kind of living being as such, what we're doing is we're apprehending or encountering phenomena, yeah, as they appear, to which there is no kind of equilibrium state. Yeah. So the distinction between a bubble and a living being is that the bubble constitutes a state, yeah, a state of equilibrium, whereas a living being can never attain such a state of equilibrium. It's always just a kind of a gathering of tendencies, and there's the requirement for self-maintaining. In other words, there's a requirement for organization. So the boundaries become both a means of establishing coherence, unity, integrity, and also they form a kind of permeable barrier of possibility or potential. And to me, this is this is organization. This is the job of that we assigned to ourselves, if you like, that we're studying organization. We're studying these very basic kind of processes of life. And so if in my work on strategy, for example, I would understand an organizational form in these terms as something to be formed. And the job of the strategists, I guess we can talk about them in plural, even if we can talk them about, maybe we shouldn't even talk about them as individuals, but nevertheless, is in a sense this job of attempting to sustain organizational boundaries in such a way that the entity maintains its cohesiveness as well as being exposed to potential or possibility. And it's how that works, how that feels, how that atmospheric kind of forming is, in a sense, permitted. That's of a kind of profound interest. So you can take a little inspiration from, I mean, there are various figures here, huh? But I guess Benjamin would be an obvious one. So to attend to the sensibilities that are required to allow this form to sort of manifest itself continually, but through processes of kind of folding and refolding, rather than making a declarative statement that this is who we are and this is where we want to be and this is where we've gone, which in a sense confines itself to the established ways of knowing. A phenomenological account is much more sensitive to this being a processual kind of everyday ongoing struggle to maintain a sense of self that allows itself to be, in a sense, exposed to what is other than to it. Yeah. So it's this communion with otherness that is in a sense the lifeblood of any organism and the lifeblood of any, and this is the job of strategy, is to consciously sort of make that apparent. Yeah. And it's quite a reflective, thoughtful, judgmental job. Yeah. It's certainly not about stating a goal and realizing that goal come what may.
Thank you very much, Robin. So, Elen, before hearing Wendelin on this.
Yes, sorry for being late. I was just struck in a strike. That's the reason why I was not there before. But I'm very close, of course, to Robin. The process philosophical dimension and extension of phenomenology helps to understand organizing and, processes which are not entities, but phenomena as events. And I think we need this more dynamic interpretation, of what is going on in organizing and in leading. And for me, of course, the contribution is to understand this as an embodied practice, and sensual and embodied, or better to say bodied, not embodied, because embodied is already a certain kind of embedment, but it's a bodied processing. And I think you mentioned atmospheric, Robin, this morning we discussed briefly the phenomenology of atmosphere, and then didn't see the need for that. But I also understand not only selves and individual actors, but also agencies of material and non-material, of human and more than human beings. In the age of Anthropocene, we need also to consider materialities and non-human dimensions, which are affected by our way of organizing and which might affect us. And so I think that's also a contribution, and not only phenomenology, but it opens up for transdisciplinarity. I think this is another quality in which I use in my work also, to understand meaning. We cannot just be phenomenological, but we need to open up for inter and trans non-disciplinarity, where we are not just bound to a school of thinking, but also cooperate, for example, with artists. The beauty of the presentation of Philippe and Tim was they opened up other perspectives, which just scholarly work would not see and have access to. So I see also the contribution of phenomenology as a bridging to other approaches. and to the othering, of course. And to allow also, beyond Levinas, what we have heard from Jean-Luc before, the non-human other in all its materialities and non and more than human dimensions.
Thank you, Wendelin. And yes, Elen, what would you like to add about this third question?
Yeah, I do use a lot of phenomenological concepts in my own work. Maybe past examples, often I was lucky enough to present them during your conferences you've been organizing, François, so thank you so much for doing that. It's not always that you have a community to share such ideas, because they have to be very specific, and I think people outside this world might not appreciate or understand. So I did use it a lot to study the theater, because in organization studies, it helped me solve the big problem of having the world as a stage being so used in social sciences, that to study theater without this very heavy already existing image and all the ideas going with it was really hard. So I know I use Merleau-Ponty, and like I'm about to present something about mangroves, and that uses a lot three concepts by Merleau-Ponty, and his vocabulary is especially helpful because it's not too much, it's not routinized. I think we're all looking for, at least I'm looking for words that are not already full of scholarly references, 3 per year, the last one in 2019. Maybe it's crazy. It's not a very good way to be a scholar, but that's how I do it. So I love to use his concept of chiasm, the reversibility of the subject of sensation and the word. That's what Wendelin was saying, and Philippe and Tim had this great presentation about arts doing this, or making that appear. And expression, the language of the thing itself. I like that a lot. And finally, motif or pattern, motif style and decision. Style is something that Robin, I think, talks a lot about very well. And I like this motif. I like it a lot. So it's very, very helpful for me. It's very precious. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Elen. What I propose now that we have shared our intuitions, our doubts, it's to hear the people in the loop of this discussion. So what are your own hesitations, doubts about what phenomenology is or can be or could be, what it could bring to organization studies? Yeah, this would be fantastic. If do not hesitate. If you have anything you would like to share with us, even very critical things, this would be a good way to also start the discussion. I guess that many of you use or have used phenomenological concepts or authors.
If I can.
Yes,
sure.
yes.
I will try to express me well. If I hearing well, the phenomenological concepts are more linked with philosophers, or like Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, Levinas, and so on? Or is it possible to amplify the point of view? I asking this because it's not perhaps the good way, but in the organization where I am working, we are using a lot of, and I don't know where is the limit, no? But ontological coaching, for example, no? in our organization with a cooperative organization to make sense and to help managers to be more performative and to see the reality like leaders, strategists, and so on. There is, of course, the aspect, the philosophical aspect, using Nietzsche or other authors also, but also aspects that are more related with psychoanalysis, or a view like this, that it's a way for the manager to know himself in a way and to conceive the reality with another, to observe the reality with another eye. So I don't know where for you there is the limit in the phenomenological aspects for the organization studies and for the researcher also. When we are looking at the reality that we are observing, the organizations that we are looking at, Georges Devreux, for example, no, with this look about the organization, was saying that it was good for us also to work on ourselves with or psychoanalysis or with. So I don't know how we use these phenomenological concepts only intellectually, or it's a way also to work with helper, or I don't know if I'm expressing me well.
If I may, maybe I have a nice, why you say only intellectually? Because when you decide, when you act, why is it only intellectually? I don't understand how could it be more? I mean, this has to be somehow intellectual. Why is it only, I mean, this is an intellectual, yeah. This is part of intellectual life. I mean, it cannot be without the intellect.
Yeah, because of the process of the ideas, no, they're not embodied if we are working this concept in one way or another way, no? If it's coming from our unconsciousness or for our consciousness in this sense. Mm-hmm. Yes, ideas to act. No? Like Searle or Austin, of course, but to integrate some change in ourselves, it's not enough to have this mental approach. No? Mm. To integrate emotion, body, and psyche.
Yeah, but yes, it's an approach. And this can be used by everyone, not only those who know the names and the schools and so on. I think it's an approach to the world. And you speak about, ask about limitations of how applied can phenomenology. That's how I understood you. And but it's, I think, my understanding, phenomenology is also critical. So it's not about improving, the practitioner, but also irritating, hopefully productively, him or her. It's also about questioning for example, at the moment, digital Cartesianism, which is continued and boosted by all these virtual teaching, problematizing also phenomena and developments. So it's, for me, one form of application is also being critical and questioning and opening up for other ways of doing things. And so it's delimiting. It's not about question of, how to apply it, but also, the application is also one of critique.
But to pick up on this, and also something Francois said earlier, I guess you would understand it as or at least I think I do anyway, as a refusal to ally with a set of ideas or a kind of manifesto or a commitment to a way of being. So for me, it's quite, important that you are, if we're talking about critique, it's not necessarily something that's, it's not something that sits with us easily, huh? So it's not something that's comfortable. It's not something that we feel, in a sense, committed to, that's kind of warranting this critique. That it's just method, basically. It's method all the way through. It's a style. It's a disposition. It's not a kind of a vision. It's not something toward which we are reaching. Yeah. So it's like an everyday dispositional style whereby you are capable of realizing the dangers in either kind of configuring the world according to a kind of a wide set of generalizing laws and dogmas, this kind of Gesellschaft type, kind of broad, yeah. And you're wary of the opposing, shall we say, risk of collapsing into this kind of Gemeinschaft, folky, interior, where everything's kind of this self-satisfied, smug, safe, kind of inward-looking space. Yeah. So it's either the world as a grid or the world as a little nest. Yeah. Neither of these are appropriate. Neither of these should belong. Yeah. To a proper understanding of life. And so for me, a phenomenological account, being method all the way through, is the dispositional capacity to resist both the totalizing kind of view of the world and this kind of inward, kind of insulating view of things. Yeah. So it's neither, to use these Tonnes distinctions, neither Gemeinschaft nor Gesellschaft. It's something else, I think. And therefore, it's not something that you can dogmatically adhere to. It's not something that you can sort of use as a manifesto, and it's not something you put on a placard and kind of wave around under people's noses. Yeah.
Any other question or comment? Yes, Leo.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentations. I'm a PhD student with François, so I'm just starting on my thesis right now, and there were many words, very interesting words said during the talk, including the word of boundaries. And Robin, you just mentioned that, if I understood it right, the phenomenology was useful to not being trapped into enclosing or opening view of the world. Maybe I understand it wrongly, but I'm just curious of how it could be a tool for organizations to perceive also the boundaries of the physical world, maybe, and to feel the existing limits that are pre-existent. So if that's not well formulated, but yes, to see the relation between phenomenology organizations and this aspect of physical boundaries that I personally feel are even more predominant. But that's really a personal feeling.
So by physical boundary, or you mean your mortality, or?
I was referring more to planetary boundaries, for example, which is a concept that has gained some recognition. But Anthropocene, planetary boundaries, for me, they all link to the same assumption that the world is limited in resources, in terms of natural resources, or.
I mean, I guess the Anthropocene is configured, it's still pretty much in a humanistic frame, insofar as we view the world as somehow tainted by the human. It's polluted by the human, and therefore it needs to be immunized against the human. There's this kind of deviant parasite, as Michel says. It's not an effective parasite, in other words, and so the Anthropocene is, in a sense, seems to be a descriptor for that failure to acknowledge that if you're parasitical on something, it needs to stay alive. Yeah, and that can only come from some form of system wisdom, where you can look outside of your parasitical relationship and critically, in a sense, observe the fact that you may be depleting it to the point of non-existence. And yet I do wonder whether this is not something that we should be critical of, to the point at least that it's a fairly kind of human-centered way of configuring the problem, calling it the Anthropocene, insofar as it seems to be much more a technical condition than a human condition. In other words, the machines seem to be doing a lot of the, in a sense, activity or having the, rather than the humans. I'm slightly puzzled over this idea that it's the Anthropocene rather than something more, you know, so it's sort of looser than that. And yet, are these also limits? I mean, I guess the idea of the planet having a limit is a peculiar one. I mean, I think it's possibly a limit state for a species. Is about as much as one can, you know, but I wouldn't say that was necessarily a physical limit for, the planet. I mean, it's just we're stretching the kind of the variables of survivability for our own species to the point where they're starting to sort of snap. Wendelin, you're waving your hand.
Well, no, it's just, you know, there's this stream of eco-phenomenology which is exactly addressing this point. You know, and that's why I'm focusing on the body, you know, which is also extended to social body up to the earth body, you know, without falling into the esoteric Gaia idea. But you know, if we consider body and body embodiment, you know, as also being limited, but also transgressing limits, then perhaps this is helpful to overcome this anthropocentric orientation. And phenomenology can offer that. There's an advanced phenomenology which leaves this Husserlian tradition we heard this morning representative of, and going beyond Cartesian and human-centered orientation and opening up to the non and more than human being. And then we can also think limits more, but not only physical limitations and limits, and but also, you know, a new understanding of boundaries. You need to also overcome certain bounded understandings of boundaries. And and phenomenology, in particular advanced eco-phenomenological and non-Cartesian phenomenology, can help to get out of these, you know, consciousness-based, subjective-based approaches, which have their own value, which we have heard this morning about. But I think we need to also advance phenomenology towards, you know, beyond the conventional approaches, which is limiting and limited, which have had their value. But I think we need also to, particularly in this context of the so-called, wrong-called Anthropocene, you know, we need to perhaps expand also what phenomenology can be and how it can approach these questions, which are really urgent indeed.
Thanks to you both.
Any other questions? Yes, Gazi, yes? No, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so thank you so much for this really interesting discussion. And my question follows up a little bit on what Wendelin was just saying. And so, some questions I was asking myself during the other talks about the role of some kind of a notion of a subject or a consciousness in these. And it seems to me that people were quite carefully avoiding some sort of transcendental notion of a subject, like some safe, I guess Robin said, smug subject that is immune or doesn't have to deal with the materiality or the object world, right? So I guess that transcendental notion is really not part of this discussion. But at the same time, it seems that there is some form of limit to the object world or the material world. There's some distinction that remains between a subject and an object, or some phenomenal experience or an experiential world and an object world in some sense. And I guess what Wendelin was saying is that we can think of maybe less, I guess, transcendental ways of thinking about that, or maybe lighter ways of thinking about it. But I guess my question then is is there a minimal notion of difference between subject and object or experience and world that is necessary for these phenomenological discussions to happen? Or can that be done away with entirely? Or does it have to be preserved in some form?
Well, it's the late ontology of Merleau-Ponty tries to overcome this, in a way by going in between subject and objects. So in between is constitutive, not the subject-object poles anymore. So with the late Merleau-Ponty, yes, it's an attempt to overcome this tradition, and it would be problematic to continue certain forms of ideas of subject and agency and object as separated entitative, phenomena. And so it's when we mentioned relationality and process before, I think then this also is a similar response to that. Instead of subject and object, processes in betweens, are more helpful than keeping a residual of the old way of doing things. But on the other hand, it's also difficult. Perhaps we need translational work also, because if you use a language beyond subject-object, you will be easily misunderstood, and perhaps we need some translational work also, and perhaps neologisms, new ways of expressing ideas, and that's why art, aesthetics is so important. Other forms of expressing, other ways of style, of presenting things, not only in the conventional way. So we need to be translational. Yeah.
I think that this is a very important issue, the objectivity. And earlier today was mentioned Graham Harman, which is one of the main inspirators of Robin Holt. Of course, he loves Graham Harman. But I mean, Graham Harman's object-oriented philosophy is part of that. But I would just refer to the work of Günther Figal on the Gegenständlichkeit and the importance of rediscovering the object and sort of having a respect to the object. So the objectivity ends up in 500 pages discussion, analytical discussion in phenomenology about how to cope with this and what does it mean in translation, in hermeneutics, and so on. And this is a little technical, perhaps, in a sense. It's written in a slightly technical way, but it really points at the importance of understanding, going back to the objects through all the possible gateways existing. So I think the in-between is, well, I don't know, but the Figal's work, and that is the sort of Husserlian, Gadamerian, more, I would say, inspired work, points to this, and in what sense it sort of applies to social systems and stuff like that. It's too early to say, but there is an interesting analytical approach there.
I mean, I would, you're picking up on what Pierre says here. I think there's something about the phenomenological which allows us to sort of loosen without either disappearing, the subject object. I think in part this is an attempt to sort of push back at the kind of Christianized kind of impress under which we have all kind of existed. So St. Augustine and his ancestral thinkers will have understood the subject as and it says increasingly a kind of self-contained orbit of inward concern for one's salvation, for one's sense of reaching a kind of point of realization that is entirely and utterly a kind of inner responsibility between you and your God. And thereby the outward world is increasingly discounted. It's something that is of less and less interest. It's something that we can dismiss, that is contingent, that is partial, that is dirty, that is everyday, that has no significance. And I think that kind of lingers in all sorts of ways in how we understand understanding. And not least because we regard what's outside of us as something secondary, as something to be used, that's there for our ends, that's to service us, and the main focus of our lives is ourself.
But
and I guess phenomenology, wants to restore some kind of balance here, to say, look, what's outside should not be dismissed so casually and so easily and so readily as something to be resented. Yeah.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, we'll have to stop.
Okay.
Here. Maybe just as a concluding word, based on Gazi's remark, we use a lot philosophy, but maybe more rarely history of philosophical thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is something interesting in Merleau-Ponty that Wendelin quoted. It's the relationship between Merleau-Ponty and process philosopher. In particular, one of them, Whitehead. Most people believe that Whitehead arrived at the end because he's part of the famous lecture at the Collège de France about nature. There is a specific chapter about it, just before the visible and the invisible. But no, most historians know that from the beginning of his career, he knew Whitehead for a very simple reason, which is a book, very famous book in the France of the 30s, which was Vers le concret by Jean Val.
Oh, ouais.
He later went to New York, set up l'École Libre des Études, and so on. And it became the boundary between American thought and French thought. So he read it very carefully at the beginning. And once you have this on mind, you read many things, the chapter about time, perception, the perception 1945, and all the other things. Why am I saying this? Because this is precisely something that has implication for his vision of subject and object. At the end, you know that he proposed this notion of flesh. And he says flesh, it's an inter-event thing, in a way. There is me, there is the computer, it's two events. And he says the question is something happening in between. And it's a very temporal phenomenon. And for him, it's the flesh of the world. And he says this is indirect ontology. It's this two. So no subject like me and object like the computer, but a death. It's a notion he often uses, a death. And there is a parallel to draw with the notion of volume in Whitehead's writings about space as well, which is fascinating, the parallel between these two things. So just to make it short, yes, many of us use a lot of philosophers, and on this question of subject, object, they create fuzzy boundaries, and this is fascinating to draw some implications. So we have to stop here because we have to move to the session. I wanted to say thank you to the speakers, the great speakers, Elen, Wendelin, and Robin. And I really want to invite you to join the session. And please do not forget that there will be a great concluding keynote by Jérôme Mélençon, precisely about Merleau-Ponty at 4 p.m. So join him as well. So let's jump to the sessions now. See you very soon, I hope.
Bye.